Welcome to the newspaper review. I am Kasitoni and I'll be taking you through this segment. First, we'll start with the Daily Trust. Boldly written, INEC in the eye of the storm. You find that on page 3 and 4 of the newspaper. On top of the newspaper, EFCC seeks final forfeiture of 57 properties linked to Malami. You find that on page 6 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, 34,000 applicants chase 1,000 police jobs in Benue. You find that on page 13 of the newspaper. Plateau, Borno, Kwara killings. Federal government has abdicated its most sacred duty of national security. That's coming from Benga Hazim. You find that on page 7 of the newspaper. At the bottom of the newspaper, killings. Tinubu visits Plateau, meets victims' family at airport. You find that on page 6 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, gunmen adopt 9. Injured 2 in Sokoto community. You find that on page 5 of the newspaper. Moving away from that newspaper to the Nigerian Tribune. Boldly written, ADC films, knocks INEC, asks Amupitan to quit. You find that on page 4 and 5 of the newspaper. At the top of the newspaper, Olubadan Palace reveals Ali. 2 others won't be available for coronation today. You find that on page 21 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, Plateau killings. Tinubu insists killers must be identified. Orders 5,000 CCTV camera for state. You find that on page 2 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, Dangote, NNPCL. Governors swell food bank with 65 billion naira. You find it on page 30 of the newspaper. Moving away from that newspaper to the Daily Sun. Boldly written, ADC dares INEC. Leaders demand resignation of Electoral Commission's chair. National commissioners vow to proceed with Congress's convention as obedient movement plan nationwide protest. Kachuku accuses Mark, others of working for Tinubu. I'll not resign, Amupitan says. You find that on page 6 of the newspaper. At the top of the newspaper, Plateau attack will not repeat itself, Tinubu assures. You are detached from suffering of Nigerians, Atiku tells President Tinubu. You find that on page 26 and page 28 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, at the bottom of the newspaper, bank collusion allegations emerge in $43.5 billion dividend dispute involving Oriental Energy. You find that on page 25 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, First Ladies Food Bank Program racks in over 65 billion naira support. You find that on page 26 of the newspaper. Another Ebonyi monarch murdered. You find that on page 29 of the newspaper. Moving away from that newspaper to the Matrix. Boldly written, INEC de-reconciliation. We move away from that newspaper to the Matrix. Boldly written, INEC de-recognition. APC, ADC trade tackles. The attack will not stand. Mark blasts INEC. Tinubu says INEC can no longer be trusted. Demands Amupitan's resignation or sack. APC fires ADC. Dismisses party as confused, desperate. Crisis actor deserve court. INEC verdict. Former presidential candidate Kachuku. You find that on page 2 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, Plateau killings. I saw your pain. Tinubu comforts mother in viral video. Says federal government will deploy AI-enabled camera network to combat insecurity. You find that on page 3 of the newspaper. At the top of the newspaper, nationwide port upgrade plan includes Eastern Corridors, says Oyetola. You find that on page 4 of the newspaper. At the bottom of the newspaper, deepening regional cooperation. You find that on page 3 of the newspaper. Tinubu appoints new PTDF Executive Secretary, extends tenure of TCN CEO. Moving away from that particular newspaper to The Nation. Boldly written, Tinubu orders deployment of AI-enabled cameras in Plateau. On top of the newspaper, First Lady, child malnutrition is national emergency. You find that on page 2 of the newspaper. EFCC seeks final forfeiture of 57 assets linked to Malami. You find that on page 4 of the newspaper. Court dismisses Showore's suit against DSS. Orders. Maritime Agency revenue jumped to 183 trillion naira last year. You find that on page 7 of the newspaper. At the bottom of the newspaper, ADC rejects INEC's action on Makinde-led NWC. You find that on page 6 of the newspaper. Still at the bottom of the newspaper, IG presents 184.9 million naira insurance benefits to families of 16 fallen police officers. You find that on page 27 of the newspaper. Away from that newspaper to First Daily. Boldly written, Plateau killings. It won't happen again. Tinubu assures victims of justice. Orders 5,000 CCTV camera. 850 troops for reinforcement. At the top of the newspaper, Mark-led ADC vows to hold congresses despite INEC dispute. At the bottom of the newspaper, troops eliminate 8 terrorists in Bana ambush. Still in the same newspaper, court jails Cross River couple 15 years for baby trafficking. Moving away from that newspaper to the New Telegraph. Boldly written, rising insecurity. Experience won't repeat itself. Tinubu vows of just killings. You find that on page 2, 3, 5, and 29 of the newspaper. On top of the newspaper, Middle East crisis. Fuel could have hit 2,000 naira per liter without local refinery. That's coming from NMDPRA. Still in the same newspaper, food security. Federal government unveils 17 billion naira support fund for community food bank. You find it on page 7 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, ADC's leadership rejection. Federal government beefs up security at INEC headquarters. You find it on page 2, 3, 4, 27, and 28 of the newspaper. Away from that newspaper to the Daily Independent. Boldly written, opposition tackles INEC. APC says democracy at risk. You find that on page 29 of the newspaper. ADC asks INEC leadership to step down over partisanship. Vows to go ahead with all its programs, congresses. Asks Tinubu why he's bent on destroying opposition. APC wants to win presidential pool by hook, crook. That's coming from PDP. ADC, Assembly of Confusion. ADC, Assembly of Confused, Desperate Politicians, says APC. Still in the same newspaper, egg industry faces mounting pressure amid chick price rage. You find that on page 27 of the newspaper. Gunmen killed 2, injured 2 in fresh Plateau attacks. You find that on page 7 of the newspaper. Your conduct at Wike's rally shameful. Bode George tells Saraki. You find that on page 7 of the newspaper. ADC, Obedient Movement demands resignation of Amupitan. You find that on page 6 of the newspaper. At the top of the newspaper, heads of federal government agencies battle for independent public sector reformer award. You find that on page 7 of the newspaper. Tinubu asks security chiefs to hunt down plateau attackers. You find that on page 6 of the newspaper. We've come to the end of the newspaper review. Many thanks for watching. Do well to join us for more breaking news across Nigeria. Do have a lovely day.